So welcome everybody to this
Benvenuti, buonasera a
first
tutti.
webinar
Benvenuti a
organized
questo
by
primo
Ledro
webinar
and Giudicaria
organizzato
Alps Biosphere
dalle
Reserve.
Alpi Ledrensi e Giudicaria,
As
la
part of the
riserva
Proud
della
to Share
biosfera, come
Week,
parte della
an
Proud to Share
initiative
Week, che è
dealing with
un'iniziativa
outdoor
che si
experience and
occupa delle
sustainability.
esperienze outdoors e
A week, an entire
iniziative di
week
sostenibilità.
of
Una
study
settimana
visit,
intera
panels,
dedicata a visite di
discussions and
studio,
webinars.
panel, discussioni
The
e
fil
webinar.
rouge of these activities
Il filo
will
rosso di
be
questa
the
attività
outdoor disciplines
sarà le
related
discipline outdoor
to 4 themes: climate
relative a
change,
4 tematiche: il cambiamento
accessibility,
climatico, l'accessibilità,
discovering the territories,
la
and
scoperta del territorio e
carry capacity.
la capacità di carico turistico.
Today's webinar will be
Il webinar
discuss
di
how
oggi
outdoor
parlerà
disciplines need
delle
to adapt
discipline
to
outdoor
climate
e come
change,
devono,
and
esse
what
devono adattarsi
mitigation
al
action
cambiamento
can be taken through
climatico e quali
the best
azioni di
practice of
mitigazione
some
possono
biosphere reserve
essere
that we
portate avanti attraverso le
thank
iniziative che vengono
be here with us.
appunto
And I
descritte dai panelisti di oggi che
suddenly
saranno
give the
con
floor
noi.
to
Io
Francesca
a
Bampa
questo
that
punto
will
lascio
lead
la parola a
us
Francesca Bampa che ci
in the
guiderà
experiences
in questa
that we'll
esperienza e
show
attraverso
today.
le esperienze che vi faremo vedere oggi. Grazie.
Thank you.
Grazie molte, grazie Anna, buon pomeriggio a tutti, o anzi
It depends from the time that you are connected to. We are here with you together with our 3 guests and speakers from Biosphere Reserves. I will bring you towards this discussion. My name is Francesca Bampa. I'm project officer of the Regional Bureau for Science and Culture in Europe of UNESCO, the field office, which is based in Venice. But today I'm sitting in Riva del Garda, which is a town that belongs to the Ledro and Giudicaria Alps of the Biosphere Reserve. And this is the first day, the opening of the Proud to Share Week. And we start with this webinar dedicated to climate change and the impacts. The first speaker that we have with us today will bring us to Spain, to an island, Menorca Island. He's a biologist and speaks on behalf of the site manager, the Agencia Menorca Reserva de Biosfera. Alex Cortada, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you. I will now share you the presentation. Okay, so, well, as Francesca was saying, as Francesca was saying, my name is Alex Cortada. I'm a biologist and I work as an environmental technician within the Island Council of Menorca. That is the island level public administration here. I will try to give you a brief context of Menorca, of its characteristics, to be able to have some idea of its nature and environment, to be able to make comparisons with your own territory if needed. Later on, I will tell you a little bit about the tourism, the model tourism that we have nowadays in the island, and also later on the threats both imposed by this tourism to the environment, and also the threats that climate change
dal cambiamento climatico, quindi quali impatti negativi sta avendo il cambiamento climatico sul turismo e sull'isola in generale. Poi vi parlerò un po' delle azioni, le azioni che noi stiamo facendo, che stiamo portando avanti in questo momento per affrontare proprio queste minacce e che abbiamo davanti a noi anche qualche soluzione. L'isola di Menorca è situata nella parte ovest del Mediterraneo, vicino alle isole Baleari, in Spagna. Una isola con una costa di circa 200 km, circa 700 km quadrati, e in inverno ci sono circa 96.000 abitanti, ci sono 8 comuni principali, potete vedere, non si vede in realtà molto bene dall'immagine satellitare, però comunque posso dirvi che non ci sono tanti abitanti in quest'isola. Nel 1993 Menorca è stata dichiarata una riserva della biosfera e grazie proprio agli sforzi che sono stati fatti dalla nostra società per far sì che lo sviluppo di quest'isola fosse sostenibile e ovviamente combinando questa attività con la salvaguardia dell'ambiente e della biosfera appunto, in un'ottica chiaramente di migliorare sempre nel futuro. Questo è quello che noi stiamo facendo in questo momento tramite l'Agenzia della Riserva di Biosfera di Minorca principalmente, che è un'entità locale che gestisce, diciamo, lavora come organismo di gestione per la riserva della biosfera. Il documento principale di lavoro è questo piano d'azione per la riserva della biosfera che risale al 2019 e che durerà fino al 2025, dove ci sarà poi una revisione del testo di questo piano e appunto è il documento principale che racchiude tutte le azioni che sono state portate avanti in passato, che sono portate avanti in questo momento e che noi cerchiamo e pianifichiamo di sviluppare non soltanto per quanto riguarda la nostra amministrazione, ma per condividere anche le azioni con la popolazione. Quindi è un documento assolutamente integrato ed è appunto il documento principale sul quale lavoriamo. I nostri 3 pilastri principali di lavoro nella riserva della biosfera sono la conservazione, la gestione del territorio e per quanto riguarda invece la riserva della biosfera, questa è l'estensione più o meno che invece quando è stata dichiarata appunto riserva era molto più ristretta, l'area era molto più ristretta, era soltanto una parte del territorio della terraferma con una piccola parte dell'area marittima e questa biosfera adesso invece ha una dimensione molto più grande. Nel 2019 è stata approvata anche l'estensione della riserva verso il mare, quelle che vengono chiamate le acque territoriali, e gli ettari sono saliti a circa 500.000 per quanto riguarda appunto la riserva, che è un numero piuttosto alto e di cui siamo molto orgogliosi. Che tipo di condizioni climatiche abbiamo in questa riserva? Abbiamo un profilo climatico tipicamente mediterraneo, quindi un clima abbastanza mediterraneo, appunto, piuttosto coerente, unitario, però con alcuni periodi di totale siccità con assenza di piogge. E quindi potete vedere i gradi di solito appunto non superano comunque i 30-35 e queste condizioni soprattutto per quanto riguarda le risorse appunto della riserva, come per esempio quelle idriche, sono molto importanti. Nonostante sia una isola molto piccola, la nostra isola comprende molte unità geologiche, come potete vedere anche dalla slide. C'è un po' un mix di materiali più recenti che si uniscono invece ai materiali molto più antichi e l'habitat, grazie appunto a questa geodiversità, è molto diversificato. La parte sud dell'isola è una zona piuttosto unica, consiste in 3 tipi di materiali diversi che insieme all'acqua del mare dà una geodiversità molto particolare, che crea anche una condizione climatica quasi di un microclima. Come stavo dicendo, questo mix di condizioni climatiche, meteorologiche e per quanto riguarda la biodiversità, c'è una differenziazione anche per quanto riguarda gli habitat. Abbiamo molte specie endemiche, soprattutto specie provenienti dalle Baleari, che arrivano appunto soltanto da Menorca, a volte anche soltanto da determinate parti dell'isola. Il paesaggio agricolo è il risultato di questa combinazione di vari tipi di terreno e alcune zone più forestali, sia all'interno, nella parte interna, quindi nell'entroterra, che ai confini dell'isola. Quindi questo crea anche una grande biodiversità. Per quanto riguarda invece il patrimonio storico, abbiamo circa 5.000 anni di presenza umana nella maggior parte dell'isola e troviamo circa 1.500 siti di interesse culturale e 1586 siti archeologici. Ci sono alcune zone che sono molto concentrate, in cui è concentrata la maggior parte del patrimonio archeologico, però appunto il patrimonio è piuttosto esteso. Quindi tutto questo mix, diciamo, di caratteristiche sia etnologiche, culturali e fisiche danno questi paesaggi. Quindi questi sono i paesaggi che si possono trovare all'interno della nostra isola. Chiaramente c'è la costa, che è molto interessante. Abbiamo quasi, dipende poi a seconda delle misurazioni, però ci sono circa 200 spiagge lungo la costa, appunto, e le spiagge cambiano molto, sia dal nord che dal nord al sud, a seconda appunto dell'area in cui si trovano. Questo, per esempio, è un parco naturale e anche questo è sempre una parte della riserva nella parte sud dell'isola, e qui si può notare la presenza soprattutto di specie di flora endemiche e sono molto interessanti. A volte le vedete proprio distribuite su queste scogliere. E poi anche questo tipo di paesaggi, quindi paesaggi cittadini, paesaggi diciamo con dei villaggi. Ma dove vivono le persone all'interno dell'isola? Come vedete in questa slide c'è un grafico nel quale vengono mostrati le differenze proprio nella distribuzione della popolazione e anche di lavoratori per ciascun settore economico. Prendendo in considerazione tutti i settori, potete vedere come nel caso di Menorca i servizi hanno un peso piuttosto importante sul numero totale dei lavoratori, perché sono, diciamo, il numero dei lavoratori in questo settore si triplica quasi rispetto agli altri. Questi servizi ovviamente sono per la maggior parte applicati nel settore turismo. Il tipo di turismo che abbiamo a Minorca è molto tipico.
It's dispersed all around the Mediterranean. It's a tourism with a really high seasonality, as you can see in this plot that comprises data from 1996. From May to October, we have this peak of presence of tourism with this maximum around August, the second, third week of August. It's almost always the same. What is going on is that this peak of August, the population is almost double the local population. That why is why I was telling you before, the people living here in winter, because it's really different from summer. All the island changes a lot. And also in total, we have around 1.5 million visitors per year. Maybe it doesn't sound a lot, but when you take into account that we are less than 100,000, 1.5 million, it becomes a lot. And this model, it has, because of this high seasonality, it has a huge impact on the island and its resources. In this case, for example, in the consumption of water. Here in the island, the water is a limited resource. We live from underwater reservoirs. And in August, where the peak of tourism is at its maximum, the consumption of fresh water is almost triplicating. Also, the waste production is triplicating, and it's kind of a challenge because, of course, we need to have through all the year, a system that is able to cope with this waste production in summer, and it imposes many challenges, at least for us. And of course, the carbon footprint, because of the production of electricity, still mostly based on fossil fuels. We hope not for much long, but still it is. And also the mobility, due to all the cars that people are renting. For example, the number of cars here, it just doubles or triples the number that we usually have in winter. You can see how many cars just coming this week, just preparing for the season. And this has a huge impact on the carbon footprint on the island. It's calculated with the data we have only from the tourists within the hotels, because for the rest there is no data, an average of 230 kilos of CO2 per tourist. That adds up to a total of more than 300,000 tons of CO2. And just for the data we have on people staying in hotels, that it's not all of them, of course. Well, and from here we change to the impacts that climate change is having on the island, not directly on tourism in this case, but on the main source, the principal resource that this tourism is using, in this case, the shoreline. Some studies have shown how most of the shoreline of Menorca had undergone a severe retreatment process, losing surface mainly in the beaches since the 70s. It's a normal dynamic for the beach to lose and regain sand over time, but some of them have lost it since the 70s and they didn't recover it. You can see, for example, like some 5 beaches from the western part, they lost around 20 meters. The one you can see in the images is the more extreme case, and it's a worrying one. Later on, for example, we detected an increase of the algae blooms, disappearance of patches in the beach that are a proliferation of algae due to the more frequent anomalies on temperature, and also because of the meteorological conditions disrupting the water flow that usually renovates the water within the beach or the bay. And this makes the algae to be able to take up nutrients and just starting multiplicating and developing. Usually it consists only on anesthetic issue, but depending on the species of algae, it could be even toxic. Regardless, it has a huge impact on tourism, as you can guess, because of the aspect, the worries of the people to go to the water, right? And that's not only because we also have sometimes this kind of situations due to extreme meteorological events that are even going to be supposed to be more frequent due to climate change, heavy rains and floods, droughts, wildfire, etc. In this case, you can see in the images the result of heavy rains we had last year, and the floods that were just washing off the shore lots of sediments through the creeks, and with the implications it had in the biological and ecological conditions of the beach. So, well, therefore, we have tourism that on one side has an important impact on the environment due to its high consumption of resources and its carbon footprint. And also at the same time, that it's the same that it's highly dependent on one of the areas that is foreseen to be the most affected by by the impacts of climate change. In this case, the coast. Therefore, we need to offer, to make available and put in value other types of outdoor activities that don't depend on the coastline. In this case, could be bird watching, hiking, horse excursions, night sky observation, etc., to have a more balanced and diverse economy. In fact, some of these activities started to gain popularity in Menorca. However, we are not yet exploiting their full potential because they have been offered in some cases by few companies or performed by individual initiatives, but always without an official and well-promoted planning. And here is where our work needs to take place. So in Menorca, we applied to the Spanish government call for projects with a Menorca Zero CO2 touristic sustainable plan. It's a broad project that is intended to connect land, sea, and sky to develop rural, maritime, and business in an economical way, but always in the thinking in the sustainable tourism and being able to mitigate and to be more resilient to climate change. As you can see, there's 3 blocks. I'll focus in the earth block, in this case, with the first of its little projects, that is the designing of land routes, because we want to offer new or more activities, but in order to do it in a proper way, we need to be able to know where people can enjoy and can perform these activities from all the territory we have. So we took advantage of that during the last year. We've been working with the different municipalities to establish a catalog of public roads and paths and differentiating them from those of private property. Because of course, if we want to do some activities, we want them to be public and not for people to finding block entrances or having problems with the owners. At the same time, we look into the already existing itineraries to establish a start point. You can see in the right a nice map, but it was not presented as such to us. It was prior to that. There's a lot of work of investigating, taking into account all data sources from municipalities, entities, to have a good starting point. And the approach, well, first of all, and starting from all these possible routes we previously know, we start performing interviews because you need to take into account to call as many people as you can to have a lot of insights from the tourism sector, outdoor activity companies, sport clubs, municipalities, NGOs, in this case, environmental groups, and important, a group of retirees, because they spend lots of times in the field and their opinion is really important. And this was in order to establish important variables and scenarios to take into account when designing these routes.
Alex, 3 minutes.
Thank you. And so a multi-layer approach with different variables of interest was taken, either to include a route or to exclude it because of the variables we finally consider. For example, we took into account several variables related with climate change. In this case, the probability, the increased probability of floods due to the foreseen changes of climate. Also the increase in wildfires. This is the map with the risk of wildfires. And of course, these were to exclude routes from them. We took into account also Nature 2000 sites to induce the routes to go through them. However, since we are going to distribute human pressure through the territory, we also need to take into account the possibility of some areas where it's better to avoid human presence. In this sense, we consider the presence of vulnerable species, such as the nesting sites of Milbus, the red kite. And the same happened to species of flora at the micro scale that we do not show here. And in the other side, we also try to have in mind the interconnection of the routes with places of interest, cultural places, and most important, to be reachable with public transport or by bike to reduce the carbon footprint and make them more available. The results from this input of data ended in more than 30 candidate routes, which need to be further debated with the groups of interest, the same from before, ending up in a final selection of 18 routes. However, we did a final validation step on these 80 routes with fieldwork. The idea was to check if they were effectively viable or if there was some situation that had not been contemplated. For example, on the examples you can see from Menorca, with a couple of them they are blocked. The last two was not an issue since it is not locked at all, and it's only used to avoid cattle to run off from the property. While the others, sometimes, as the first one, can be completely blocked by the owners. In this case, municipalities, they will take action, but in the meantime, we discarded, at least temporarily, within the list of routes, and we selected the next line in the rank. All this information was translated in a series of 5 cards, one per each of the routes, with its characteristics, values, and description. This information can be easily shared with the different stakeholders and also with the general public. Although we are planning to provide a more interactive and attractive way of promoting this information, because nowadays we have interactive apps and websites that are more interesting for people, for the general public. And well, so we hope that with this little project, we are able to contribute to a higher diversification of outdoor activities that can be experienced in Menorca, taking at the same time some of the human pressure from the coastline, where the climate change can have more severe impacts on the future, and redistributing it through the rest of the territory. While always, and it's really important, taking into account the capacity of the territory to assume this human pressure without its values being affected, as it should be done as the biosphere reserve that we are. So thank you, muchas gracias, and grazie.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you very much for this. There will be time towards the end after our next 2 speakers to pose your questions. I have again to welcome the participants that joined during your presentation to this first webinar organized during the Proud to Share Week, organized by the Alpi Giudicaria and Ledrense, or Ledro and Giudicaria Alps of the Biosphere Reserve in Italy. This is the first day, and this is the first webinar dedicated to the impact of climate change towards biosphere reserves all over the world. We started with Minorca Island. We had our colleague, Alex Cortada. You have 3 options in the sidebar. One is the interpretation. So, se abbiamo italiani che vogliono sentire la traduzione in inglese.
So if we have Italians who would like to listen to the Italian translation, you can use the icon for interpreting.
We will keep speaking in our original, so we will keep speaking in English. Second information is that we are going to register this webinar. So you will find the link, you can rewatch it through the Biosphere Reserve website. And the third information is that we will have half an hour of questions and answers towards the end. So don't worry, we will go through all your questions. You will have time, we will go through to the chat. Maybe we have also time to give you the floor to pose the questions. We will see how long we will go. Now, we make a travel journey overseas. So from Minorca Island, from Mediterranean climate, we go to US. We go to visit the Champlain Adirondack Biosphere Reserve, huge lake of Champlain and Adirondack and Green Mountains, a lot of coniferous and deciduous forests. And we will pose the questions, what is the impact of climate change towards your biosphere reserve, to the Director of Climate Initiatives, the Wild Center, Director Jen Kretzer. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just going to share my screen and start the slideshow. Okay. Hello, everybody. Again, my name is Jen Kretzer. I'm the Director of Climate Initiatives for a science museum called the Wild Center, located in the Champlain Adirondack Biosphere Network. I'm very happy to be here today. I'm going to talk from the perspective of education and the role of education in combating climate change and in a place that has high outdoor recreation and tourism. So I'll share a little bit first about where I'm coming from and a little bit more about the biosphere and the Adirondack Park and the impacts that climate change is having on our region. And then I'll shift to talking about the role of education and how to engage and empower young people to join us in working on solutions for climate change in our communities. So first of all, where we're located is in the far northern part of New York State. This is part of the Wild Center right here, our outdoor walkway overlooking the coniferous forests and mountains of the Champlain Adirondack Biosphere. Just to give you a little perspective, so the Adirondack Park, which I've mentioned, is this large park inside the Champlain Adirondack Biosphere Reserve, which spans across both northern New York State and Vermont, and the state of Vermont, and borders with Canada to the north. So this whole region is close to 4 million hectares. The Adirondack Park is also quite large. So this is within the biosphere, we have a very unique protected area called the Adirondack Park. It is also about 3 million hectares. And you can see some of the large national parks in the United States fit inside the Adirondack Park. So it is a very large region, and it has both lands that are publicly owned and protected, and then also protected by the New York State Constitution. So they will always be protected. So there are people living within the park, but there's also large amounts of protected lands that can never be developed. It has a very rich history of tourism. This photo here is from the Lake Placid area, which is well known for the 1980 and 1932 Winter Olympics. The region, we see about 12 million visitors a year, but there are about 60 million people within a day's drive from the large metropolitan areas across the northeast of the United States, as well as to our north in Canada. There's lots of activities and not just winter activities. Similar to Mallorca, it's very seasonal. So we have a high season in the summer where we attract millions of people for recreation such as canoeing, camping, fishing, hiking, and also in the wintertime for the winter sports such as cross-country skiing, dog sledding, downhill skiing, and many other winter pursuits. So the economy is very strongly driven by tourism. On the eastern side of the Biosphere Reserve towards in the Vermont area, it's a little more diversified than it is here in the protected Adirondack Park. In the Vermont part of the Biosphere Reserve, it is predominantly agriculture with some forestry and also light industry. So they're pretty different, different regions. We also have, as I mentioned, large protected areas, which with very large swaths of unbroken boreal forest and a lot of winter, and it's quite a challenging terrain. But we have seen quite an impact of climate change in our region, and I'm going to outline some of those impacts right now. So some of the things that we've seen are much warming. So we've warmed about 2 degrees centigrade or 7 degrees Fahrenheit over the last probably 30 years. We've seen in the graph below, this is actually for one of our very large lakes called Lake Champlain. You can see in this data that the lake actually has the number of years that the lake is not freezing is greatly increasing now, and even more so as we get into 2022, that it has not frozen. So this really is impacting tourism a great deal. We have shorter and milder winters for a region that really depends on ski tourism and the ski industry, which makes up a huge percentage of our income. It's been really devastating for us to see the lack of snowpack. We've also seen impacts on our wildlife, on flora and fauna. We see springtime arriving approximately 2 weeks earlier and winter starting even later. So typically in the past, it started in October for winter, and now it is more like December, which impacts again the tourism, but also the flora and fauna. In addition to seeing spring happen earlier, we are also seeing impacts from illnesses such as Lyme disease and other tick-borne and mosquito illnesses. So that's been something that has had a large public health threat in our region and continues to be quite a problem. We've also experienced bigger storms. So overall, precipitation is increasing. We've had very large storms, hurricanes that have wiped out communities, that have destroyed roads, that have destroyed infrastructure, that have made it very difficult for emergency services to get from one area to the next, and have isolated towns, creating a lot of danger for residents and tourists alike. So now I'm going to switch and talk about the role of education in creating and accelerating climate solutions and climate action. So as a science center, as a museum, as a place for education, we think about the way we approach climate change education in 6 different ways. So we think about how we are working with schools and teachers through education. We think about how we are educating the public through public awareness, providing public access to information, and providing public participation in deliberation and dialogue, and how communities might solve climate change and how they might approach addressing solutions and to build resilience. We also think about training, how we are helping develop new pathways for careers and for workforce development. And we also, as a museum, think about how we can help coordinate networks or coordinate communities. We have very small, I should have mentioned this, but our communities are quite small. They're very remote and rural. So that means that there may be, in the community I live, which is the largest in the region, is around 6,000 people, but there are communities of about 200. So how can places that are educational, such as the Wild Center, how can we provide opportunities for education and to help support everyone through the resources we have? So our museum focuses on the natural history of the Adirondacks. Our mission is to ignite an enduring passion for the Adirondack region where people and nature thrive together and offer an example for the world. So we have around 100,000+ visitors to our museum each year. So these are all tourists for the most part, but we also work very heavily within our schools, seeing around 10,000 students each year. But we also, through our website, provide a lot of information. And after my talk, I'll drop some links in the chat for you. We provide outdoor recreation through our trail systems for families and people with low accessibility. We have live animal displays so people can come and see animals up close and personal. And we offer unique opportunities for visitors to try out new forms of recreation, such as stand-up paddleboarding and canoeing. We also are a demonstration site. So our museum works to showcase green solutions, such as our huge solar array we have here. We were the first museum in New York State to have what's called LEED certification. So it's through the US Green Buildings Council. It's a high level and very difficult to get certification for our green building design. And through all the work that we're doing as being an education and demonstration, we also think about how we reach our audiences. So one of the things that we've done is to rethink about our center as being a place where we can convene and bring together different types of audiences to have conversations that are critical to science and society. So as I mentioned earlier, this whole region, the whole biosphere, is very dependent on snow and tourism and skiing. So we have hosted a conversation that we called Winter Green, and the entry point being our strong winter culture and economy. And we brought together business leaders, tourism professionals, people with small businesses, sports aficionados, to talk about the impacts of climate change and to think about how solutions. So our role as a museum was to help to bring people together to supply the building, the support, the resources, and the staff to help facilitate a conversation that was really important and identified as a need within the community. So this was very successful, and we started doing more of these types of meetings, big meetings. So another meeting that we had was shortly after our last hurricane, where many communities were deeply impacted, and it was very, it really created a wake-up call, so to speak, of people to think about like how they can make their communities more resilient for storms. So we brought together municipal leaders, governments, community leaders, decision makers, and emergency personnel to talk about the impacts of climate change in their small communities, the impacts that the Hurricane Irene had on their communities, and what they were doing moving forward. This was a particularly important conversation because this region of both New York and Northern Vermont is quite conservative, but this was able to find ways, politically conservative. So this was really helped to find and bridge political divides, which is quite high in America. And we really worked towards creating common dialogue and identifying needs and thinking about solutions moving forward. And this was also quite successful. This is just images from that last hurricane. Another audience that we brought together were builders, architects, and planners to think about how to design and build greener for the Adirondacks. So this again was a different audience to bring together. well, another thing that we're doing right now and opening this summer is that we're actually designing a whole new exhibition on climate change solutions that will elevate the work happening across the region on climate change and help to tell the story of those people working on the front lines of climate change in our communities, to help to elevate those voices. I also want to finally wrap up in talking about our youth climate program. So as I mentioned, we have a very strong youth climate program that works to engage and inspire and convene young people about climate change and helps to lift up their voices and helps them to be a part of climate solutions. So we do this by organizing youth climate summits, and we've done this in the Adirondacks for the last 14 years, where we bring together about 200 to 250 high school students, so students between the ages of 14 and 18, together to talk about climate change, to learn about the science, the impacts in their community, and the solutions. As they come together for 1 to 2 days, they learn all about different types of energy, green building design, food systems, climate justice, youth leadership development. So all different types of workshops and sessions and events. And they are all together in our museum to help create, and then they create a climate action plan to bring back to their communities. Whoops. So we really do focus on getting them to understand that science and to think about the solutions. We ground our work in these program values. And as I mentioned, I'll share a link where you can see all of our resources that we provide and read a little bit more. So we think about how all of our work can be place-based, action-oriented, solutions-focused, youth-driven, hopeful, and equitable. So these values are important for all of those programs. So one big part of our youth climate summits is for the students to do climate action planning. So they work in teams to create a climate action plan or project that they can bring back to their schools and communities to do work and to implement action in those communities. So I want to share some examples of that. For instance, we have a group of students that started a community composting. So they gather food waste and food scraps from across their community. They use this giant drum composter, and then they actually sell the compost afterwards. So they started their own business, and they work across the community to help keep food scraps out of the landfills. This is an example from a youth climate summit that was held in Sri Lanka, where they were working on creating outdoor spaces in their communities using eco bricks, which is a type of special building material. We've also had students that have worked directly with governments and municipalities to design climate action plans for their communities. So in this way, those students are being included in decisions that are being made about their future and about the future of the places where they live. And we're helping them to develop the leadership skills and the ability to work with their local governments to help make those decisions. As you probably saw, we actually do summits all over the world. So in addition to the Adirondacks, we're in the Adirondack Biosphere Reserve, we actually have done over 100 youth climate summits in 7 different countries. So, and we're growing all of the time. And I'll share last couple slides, a few resources that you can see. And actually right now, as I'm speaking to you here, there is a youth climate summit happening at the UNESCO Frontenac Arch Biosphere, which is in just over the border in Canada, where students are gathering today and tomorrow to learn about creating climate resilience in their schools and in their communities. So we've helped these summits start all over the world We have lots of free materials that we provide, including a free toolkit and for all kinds of free materials. And I'm happy to talk to anyone about this at a future date. But it's really an amazing way to engage and inspire young people to take action in their community. And as a science center and as a museum, we feel that that engaging and bringing education to the forefront of working on climate change is really critical. We need everyone everywhere to be working on climate change, and young people have a huge stake in the future, and they really want to be a part of the solution, but they need adults like us to work in partnership with them to help make that happen. So I provided my information here with my email and a link to our website, and I'll also put some links in the chat to share about our resources. So I would be happy to speak more if you are at all interested in starting a youth climate summit in your biosphere or wherever you live in your community. I'd be happy to help you do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jen. I have to say I have plenty of questions for you, but I will keep my mouth and my writing because I will let participants pick the question and answer option here and pose you questions, and also to our colleague Alex. It's nice how you really point out another big item that it's really important for UNESCO, which is education, which is part. It's a value, but it's also something that needs to be used, and youth has to be engaged during this planning and managing together the biosphere reserve, also in view of the impact of climate change. And it was very nice linking to what is happening now during the Proud to Share week, because today there was the opening, and exactly the president of the province here was mentioning the fact that we need to take into account challenges posed by seasons, so winter and summer. Indeed, alpine biosphere reserves, mountainous biosphere reserves, as well as marine islands biosphere reserves are very much impacted towards climate change. So during peak seasons of tourists, they have to face challenges. And at the same time, they have also to take into consideration the low season peak. So the seasons where there are no tourists, but maybe something challenging is happening there too, such as big inundations, floods, or facing disasters. So I invite participants to pose questions to the speakers in a question and answer. We will have in 20 minutes time to go through your questions and to pose to our colleagues, our speakers. But I want to go back, make again another travel overseas. We go back, and now you're going to visit through our next speaker, the Ledro and Giudicaria Alps Biosphere Reserves. So we are in Italy, we are in the north part of Italy. We have a lake, but we have also a little bit touching the Dolomites, the Brenta Dolomites. We have with us Dr. Nico Salmaso, which works for Fondazione MAC. He's head of research unit, and he will touch upon another dear value of UNESCO, which is science, applied to the biosphere reserve. Dr. Nico Salmaso, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Francesca. I'm happy to contribute with in this webinar. And first of all, I wish to thank the organizers for this invitation, which provide us a great opportunity to present the activities and collaboration that we began between the Foundation MAC and the Reserve Ledensi and the Giudicaria Biosphere. And we have also the occasion to present one of the most beautiful reserves, I have to say, not only in Italy, but also in the world. Let's try to do this. So, just a few words about the reserve. The reserve is located in northeastern Italy, in the northeast Eastern Alps, and it has a surface of over 470 square kilometers. It is located in the province of Trento, and the reserve obtained the UNESCO international recognition as a biosphere reserve in 2015. The diversity of terrestrial and aquatic environments included in the reserve is really very impressive. We have a wide range of habitats from terrestrial environments to a very rich aquatic diversity in the hydrographical networks with small and large lakes, large forests, high mountains. Just to give a few examples, a few environments, important environments included in the reserve are represented by the northern part of Lake Garda, which is the largest Italian lake. It is located at the altitude of 65 meters above the sea level, and it has a typical Mediterranean and lake climate. And the highest point of the reserve is represented by the Adamello and Brenta mountain chain, which reach an altitude of over 3,000 meters above the sea level. And so we can easily understand how this mosaic of ecosystems can host an enormous biological diversity. And it is quite typical, not only in the Alpi Ledrensi and the Giudicaria Reserve, but also in the whole alpine chain that owing to this impressive richness in environment and biological diversity, the alpine regions are a powerful attractor for outdoor activities and tourism. Just to give some idea about this, some number, we can report that in the only Trentino province, the overnight stays recorded in hotel and non-hotel facilities easily exceed the number of 18 million. These are estimates recorded in 2018. We can also add that in the whole Lake Garda, that is not only the part included in the reserve, the number of tourist presences every year is over 25 million. And so we can easily understand what can be the contribution of tourism and outdoor activities on the gross domestic product is very high contribution. And so we can also easily state that biodiversity and ecosystem functioning are fundamental elements for tourism. But it is true also the opposite, that tourism can have a great role in promoting the conservation of habitats and biodiversity. And yet, when a few years ago we began a collaboration with the Biosphere Alpi Ledrensi and Giudicaria, we soon realized that many important gaps in biodiversity knowledge did exist. And this was particularly true for a few environments and a few organisms, in particular aquatic habitats and microorganisms. And this was not a surprise. This was not a surprise because our perception of biodiversity of the environment is strongly biased towards the larger organisms. For example, the large vegetation, plants, flowers, the birds, the large reptiles and amphibians, and also mammals and microinvertebrates. So all the organisms that we can see, for which we can have a direct experience. But this is not true for other components of the ecosystems, other components that can play a very important role in shaping habitat characteristics and quality, and controlling also the attractiveness of the different terrestrial and aquatic environments, and which diversity is essential just to operate in a resilient way against the effects of climate change, because diversity means adaptation, and adaptation is very important, in particular for the smaller organisms. So we soon realized that the composition and distribution of aquatic microorganisms, including the smaller bacteria, but also protists, microalgae in the biosphere, were practically unknown. And so I'm sure that a few of us can ask themselves, but do microorganisms really matter to us? And why should we care about the health and the functions of microorganisms? These are questions that are perfectly justifiable, because usually we think about something that can be dangerous. Our mind comes towards the pathogens, towards the organisms that can harm human health. But that's true. We have to be careful about pathogens, about harmful microorganisms, but at the same time, we have to take care about the good organisms. So the question, why should we care about the health and function of microorganisms? This question is quite easy to answer, because simply microbes run the world. Microbes are able to convert the key elements of life, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and sulfur, into forms that are accessible to all other living things. In other words, they are able to perform a number of important ecosystem services. Here I have reported only a couple of possible ecosystem services, two among the most important, that is nitrogen fixation and photosynthesis. As for nitrogen fixation in terrestrial systems, there are specialized groups of bacteria that are able to fix gaseous nitrogen into molecules that can be readily assimilable by vegetation, and other organisms able to do the opposite functions, that is, transform molecules into nitrogen gas. Nitrogen fixation is a process that is performed also in aquatic environments, freshwater and oceans. The other process that I wish just to mention is photosynthesis, and we have to consider the important role played by Prochlorococcus, which is a very small cyanobacterium living in oceans. It has dimensions less than 1 micrometer. And for this reason, it can be able to develop with very high densities in the sea, with the concentrations of over 100,000 of cells per milliliter. But probably the most important thing that can be of interest for us, considering our present anthropogenic point of view, is that the estimated amount of global photosynthesis of these organisms is of around 5%. And this means that just now the the oxygen that we are inspiring and that allow us to live is freely offered by these organisms, and the cousins, the brothers, the sisters of these organisms, phytoplankton in general, are able to produce from the 50 to the 80% of the oxygen that is produced globally in the world. And these organisms have an important role in controlling global warming and the increase in CO2, because photosynthesis means consumption of dioxide of carbon and the production of oxygen. But things are not so simple, because microbes can be also dangerous, and this is the case of toxigenic cyanobacteria. This group of microalgae is the most abundant in anthropogenic impacted eutrophic water bodies. There is a clear correlation between the abundance of cyanobacteria and the availability of algal nutrients, here total phosphorus. And probably one of the most important things in a context of global warming is that this group is strongly favored by climate change, in particular by rising water temperatures, which contribute to increase the stability of the water column, and so determining also conditions which are favorable for the development of algal blooms. Another characteristic of this group is that it includes many toxigenic species, able to produce a wide range of cyanotoxins, including hepatotoxins and neurotoxins. And that's the reason why when cyanobacteria are developing massively due to eutrophication or climate change, this huge growth can have important consequences for the exploitation of water resources, outdoor activities, and tourism. Here we have an example of a leaflet that has been published by the Department of Health of the New York State, which report indications and advise about what to do when people or animals are coming in contact with the water contaminated by cyanobacteria. And the indications are quite clear. By the way, this is an example of leaflet, but many governments around the world have published something similar and are distributing this material among the tourists and the people involved in outdoor activities. So the indications are quite clear. Avoid blooms while swimming, fishing, boating, or wading. So for the considerations that we have reported just now, in 2018, we began a collaboration with the Alpi Ledrensi and Giudicaria Biosphere with the aim to begin a wide survey on the aquatic ecosystems, in particular lakes in the biosphere. And the research was carried out on 20 different lakes belonging to 6 different lake types, with the aim to analyze in particular which represented the unknown biological dimension of the biosphere, that is the aquatic microorganisms. The approach was based on the use of the analysis of environmental DNA in water and sediments. Basically, the approach included the collection of water and sediments, the filtration of water samples, the homogenization of sediment samples, DNA extraction from living salts, and the high throughput sequencing of two gene targets able to represent sequences for bacteria, cyanobacteria, and protists and phytoplankton, respectively. Well, these are the results, and the results were really astonishing because we were able to find an enormous biodiversity. The number of bacterial genetic variants in the samples of water and sediments was very high, with a range from around 200 to over 1,500 different sequence variants per sample. The sequences were also taxonomically classified, providing a first account of the biodiversity of bacteria and cyanobacteria in the biosphere. We can see here that the contribution of cyanobacteria was quite limited in the whole biosphere. And in the biosphere, the cyanobacteria were mostly represented in Lake Ledro, especially with the Plantotrix rubaceens, which was responsible also of a few algal blooms in the past, before better management actions began a few years ago, and in Lake Garda. In Lake Garda, which showed the development of the same species and also of other different cyanobacteria. But we can say that overall, cyanobacterial biomass in these two lakes is still low due to the strict control of algal nutrients, which help maintain low to moderate trophic status in the two lakes. This means that a good management selection of good management options was quite effective in controlling the quality of these two environments. But what is the problem now? The problem is something that it is difficult to control at the local level. And the problem now is that the increase in water temperatures observed in the last 3 decades may counteract the effects of nutrient management. And here we can see an example in Lake Garda. These reports the long-term development of water temperatures in the first 50 meters of the water column. And these show clearly a significant increase in water temperature at a rate of around 0.1 degrees centigrade per decade. This is a huge increase. And similar increases were recorded in the large lakes, in all the large lakes south of the Alps, and considering a collaboration that we had at the global level, also in the majority of lakes in the world. So Lake Garda, Lake Ledro are not alone. They are in a good, nice group, which is characterized by an increase in water temperature. And I repeat, this is something that cannot be solved immediately at the local level, because these are decisions that have to be taken at the global level. First of all, with actions aimed at decreasing CO2 concentrations.
Dr. San Maso, 2 minutes.
Thanks, Francesca. Returning back to biodiversity, similar high values of biodiversity were detected for protists and microalgae. Here, I can see what we can do with this data, because we can easily determine for the different environments the fractions of organisms devoted to biogeochemical cycles and degradation of organic matter and the primary producers. And the DNA analysis allowed to discover a biodiversity world and functions that otherwise would have been completely unknown or very difficult to disclose, with the only use of traditional methods, including microscopy or isolation and cultivation.
L'isolamento e la coltura. Non possiamo chiaramente descrivere tutto.
Here I can cite only a couple of examples among two of the most abundant protists, that is Stylonychia, which is a ciliate that prey on other protozoans and bacteria, and Rogostoma, which is omnivorous and feed on bacteria, yeast, and algae. By the way, this organism is able to withstand drought period and desiccation. So it is just adapted to what can be the effects of climate change. I wish to draw a few conclusions, and I wish to begin with a nice statement provided by the United Nations Environment Programme. With international tourism involving 1.2 billion tourists and generating $1.5 trillion a year, and while also accounting for about 9% of global employment, the potential of tourism to help promote and sustain biodiversity is colossal. You can perceive that here we have an important change of paradigm, that is considering the important effects of tourism in promoting the protection of habitats and environments. For citizens, the value of outdoor recreation can lead to powerful arguments for conservation of habitats and the biodiversity they sustain. And I wish here to highlight that this is valid at the global value, but it is even more valid at the local value, because the actions carried out at the local values are those actions that are able to shape the big picture. And in this context, the biospheres have a great role in promoting the culture of biodiversity. But more efforts have to be invested in the conservation not only of macroorganisms, but also microorganisms, that is bacteria, protists, fungi. And I wish also to add that the approach that was based on the analysis of environmental DNA collected in the Alpi Ledrensi Giudicaria Biosphere Reserves can be surely replicated also in other biosphere reserves. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salmaso. I really like how you handed your presentation. It's an offer, of peer learning and discussion, how between biosphere reserves we can offer solutions or propose ways how to face together those challenges posed by climate change. So I remember to the participants that are still with us, I can see 27 participants so far, that they can pose questions to the question and answer sidebar, but they can also write on the chat. And I'm happy also to invite you to pose the question yourself. So I can see that on the chat, there is a question for Jen Kretzer. Yara Maria, would you like to pose yourself the question, or shall I pose directly to Jen? If you wish to pose the questions yourself, we can give you the floor for 30 seconds. If I don't hear directly, I will just... Okay, so the question for Jen is, if first you involved in your initiatives the youth from your biosphere reserve, and we have regional thematics networks of biosphere reserves in MAB. One of them is IberoMAB. So the question is if you involved this network in your initiatives.
Yes, thank you for your questions. I'll answer the first question. We definitely involve youth from across our biosphere, the Champlain Adirondack biosphere, in both youth climate summits that happened at the Wild Center, as well as we worked with the University of Vermont in Burlington, Vermont, to engage with youth from Vermont. So there were two very specific regions of the biosphere, and we felt having youth there with very different impacts. I mean, some different impacts, but also different solutions given the types of communities. So, so we had two separate, we've been having two separate youth climate summits in our biosphere. And then we have not yet engaged with the Ibero-MAB network, but that would be something we would be very excited to do. So I'd be happy to learn more about how we could do that and how we can share the work.
Indeed, so this is a call for not only my office, but also the Secretariat in Paris and all the participants here that I can see some of them are part of the youth, of the MAB youth and from the thematics. So let's work together, let's put in contact. This is one of the reasons why we are doing this webinar as well. So there is another question from Nadine Graziotti. Nadine, if you want to pose the questions, if not, I can do it for you. So in the meanwhile, I remember participants that they can pose questions in the question and answer or write in the chat. So Professor Salmaso, there is a question for you, on two questions. So let's say that the general question is what's next? So how the territory, so we'll speak about Garda Trentino, so the area of the community and the land of the biosphere reserve is thinking to help this process, this work together in order to face the climate change challenges, and how a citizen can help, how a citizen can engage within the biosphere reserve and with you to do something.
Yeah, that's an important question because the threats from climate change can be counteracted by personal behavior, but also government actions. I wish to remind that just a few weeks ago, there was an important meeting at the Museum of Trento that collected many research institutions and government body in the Trentino region with the aim to compare the different results obtained in the investigations by research institutions, universities, and government bodies. This allowed to compare the results obtained from the investigations carried out in forestry, high mountains, and water bodies. And there is now a table with the different experts that have the role to compare the different options that were made available just at the national level with the previous work, which began, I think, just 10 years ago. And now there are a few indications, general indications, but these indications have to be adapted to the different environments, including the Trentino Alto Adige. What we can do? We can do really a lot of things at the local level because clearly the personal behavior, what we can do personally is really a lot, changing also our day-to-day behavior. But the most important thing is that we have to adopt and to have an important role in an international context, because global change is something that has to be considered just with a unique set of actions from the different countries. What I can do, one unique country is not sufficient. If you wanted to decrease CO2, you have to do this working in an international context. But it is also important, and here there's a great role of research. It is important to state what is the present situation and what could be the future situation in reply to the, in particular, to the increase in water temperature. That's very important because when we know what could happen in the future, we have a good way just to identify what can be the best instruments that we have to adopt to counteract these effects.
Thank you, Dr. Salmaso. Indeed, we need to start from the citizen, but then we need as well to have some help and capacity building from the international community in order to build up together. So I have a question from the floor from colleagues of UNESCO for Alex Portada. So you spoke about changing the model. We need to change the model in the way how we think tourism. Okay, and you gave us the example what is happening in your island, and also the huge effects of having this massive flow of tourists in terms of emission, of fossil fuels, and also coupled with the challenges, algae, sediments, and so on. So you said we changed the model. You gave us an example. It's a project. So the question is, which stage of the change you are in the model, and what's the status of their activities? How do you feel you could help other biosphere reserves in taking first steps?
Well, it's a change in progress. It's not an easy one because we have a really huge tradition of this type of tourism models since the 70s. Or in fact, the 80s, the 90s, this tourism model just kicked off, and it started a lot of movements within the European territory. And yes, in fact, we are gladly seeing a shift towards this more, as to say, sustainable model. People enjoying nature, willing to enjoy other aspects than simply beach and sun. That's it's important to say that we don't want to stop having people enjoying the beach and the sun, just to diversify a little bit the offer of activities, and also to making the economy, our economy, more resilient, and also not that highly seasonal, because of the, for example, global change. Now, climate change has extreme impacts. We cannot be dependent on something that only happens few months per year. And just not speaking about tourism per se, but also for the activities available for local population as well, just to be a way to enjoy, to discover the biosphere reserve we live on, and to be able to understand, to love its values, natural, cultural ones. And as the saying goes, right, in order to preserve something, you first need to love it, and to love it, you need to know it properly. So yes, we're gladly seeing a shift towards this more ecotourism, just to give it a word. People is coming all around the world. We have a good example. For example, we have Camille Alliance, because since I was speaking about land routes before, we have one of them that is really well known for its 20 years of experience, accumulated experience. People is coming to just enjoy, because it's a circular path. It's a really emblematic one going all through the island. People is coming sometimes just for bird watching through it. Other crazy people is coming just to run the 80 and 45 kilometers through it. I mean, we have different types of activities also, for example, by bike, by horse, and this is a good example that tells us that this is working. It's not enough, because we cannot rely only on this really well-known path. So that's the reason we are trying to offer a more wide array of opportunities for people to enjoy the island.
Thank you very much. There is a question from Robert Finkham for Dr. Salmaso. So have you found, Doctor, that such excellent science and research evidence-based work has translated into greater community civic awareness and practice? Have you seen this kind of translation? I guess this is a question regarding the community itself in the biosphere reserve.
Yeah, we have tried to integrate this information, especially in the management, I have to say that what we are doing is essential, something that has to be integrated in a bigger picture. What we are finding is something that can have an important local importance and important local effects caused by the specific characteristics of the biosphere. It is important to integrate these investigations in a big picture, and in this way the scientific collaborations are very important. We have to actually this because our data have been shared with many groups. The data from Lake Garda, the phytoplankton of Lake Garda, is shared, for example, just now, in these weeks, in these months, in a larger collaboration group, in which there is also Lake Champlain with the University of Vermont, with Jason Stockwell, that is from there, and we are studying the effects of the thunderstorms on phytoplankton. So the idea is that if we want to find something and some important messages to disseminate, we cannot disseminate exclusively what we are finding in our specific places. We have to integrate in a larger picture because we are interested not only in the specificities, we are interested in finding general processes of general value. And it is only finding general processes of general value that we are able to provide information that can be used also for management. That's the only way. We cannot be alone, and we have to be integrated in a wider environment. And I began to work with the biosphere reserves only a few years ago, also because the Alpi Ledrensi and Giudicaria Reserve was established in 2015, not before. So it is quite young. So these relationships are also young, but I'm sure that there are very nice perspectives in integrating the work that we are doing in perspectives also with other biosphere reserves. Also because these can assure us of working in mostly pristine environments, not only in environments which are affected by anthropogenic activities. And this is something that can represent some bias in our work, because most of the time we are asked to act when an habitat is already affected, strongly affected by anthropogenic pressure, and please help us to recover this environment. No, I think that we should act before these things happen, also because we need to know what is the basic level of the biodiversity in these pristine environments.
Thank you, Dr. Salmaso. I can see in the chat that your presentation is rising more interest and comments. So I can read the next one. There are two more comments and questions that I can say they are for you, but they are all for us. And also, maybe also Jen Kretzer could come back on this, because they are thanking you for your presentation, and they wonder how studies like yours, Dr. Salmaso, are integrated into scientist platforms, stimulated, for example, from the UNESCO IOC and the program of the Ocean Decade, and the fact that we can consider coastal areas can include as well lakes and ponds, indeed, because we are speaking about processes, we are speaking about indicators and guidelines that might be applied also in other kinds of, let's call it water bodies. And again, there is also a question, how can we suggest to scientists of their biosphere reserve from the participants to integrate with a platform such you are proposing, Dr. Salmaso? Maybe we can pose this question to Jen. So maybe how you are thinking that you could integrate your work with the work that Dr. Salmaso is doing is something that you could foresee done?
Thank you for the question. I mean, I think for with the work that we're doing, we try to connect, well, two things. One is we see centers such as ours as opportunities to elevate the voices of scientists doing work. So having a public communication platform so the public can be engaged and have awareness around issues that are happening across our region. And I think that there's a real opportunity within the biosphere reserves to look towards community organizations, museums, science centers, nature centers, to find ways to connect scientists and provide a platform for public communication. So that the public can hear about what impacts are happening and become engaged and build their own sense of understanding of the impacts that are happening in their region. Secondly, I think there's a unique opportunity to involve young people in scientific research and ways to connect their own, to give them skills to sort of demonstrate and provide a pathway to understanding science and the impacts, whether it's within science or social science, and contribute to that understanding of that region, of that particular reserve. And again, how they can have a path forward, maybe come together to share those results, come together to intersect with other researchers and scientists. So you're creating this community of practice that can then be elevated through collective action on climate change.
Thank you, Jen. I hope you gave a kind of inspiration as reply. I don't know if you will reply to the questions to our dear participants, but I can see there are many ways we can work together in order to use the knowledge that is generated in a biosphere reserve and use it and together and maybe create some kind of protocols or guidelines that can work in different places, but with similar characteristics. So we are coming to a end. We are already 2 minutes late, so I don't want to keep participants longer here. I will do two things. The first thing, I will ask our speakers, thanking them, to tell us one take-home message. And for this, I will ask you to keep 1 minute or like 30 seconds, just take-home message for our participants. And the next, I'll tell you later. Please, Alex, you start. Your take-home message.
Okay, so well, my take-home message would be that it can be done regardless of how small or big your project is going to be or it's intended to be. And you need to have as much information of your territory and your economy as possible, but most important, to take into account as many people as you can, because that's the important part, to have something for the people and from the people.
Thank you, Alex. Jen, the floor is yours for your take-home message.
Thank you. I love what Alex just said, and just to build on that, just the engagement and the power of young people, that to see how we can connect with young people, how we can engage them in working on climate resilience for a just and sustainable future.
And Dr. Salmaso, your take-home message for our participants? You're muted. Dr. Salmaso, you're muted. I need you to unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry. Less than 30 seconds. I wish to speak again on the biodiversity, which is essential to maintain habitat quality and active activities, which are essential elements to promote outdoor activities and tourism. On the other way, tourism can have a great role in the protection of habitats and biodiversity. And you know that it is an important change of paradigm.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salmaso. Thank you very much, Director Kretzer. Thank you very much, Dr. Cortada, for this. I think that we learned a lot in such short time. Many informations that I know that the organization from the Alpi Ledrenice Giudicaria won't leave it there. There is a recording that will be available online, plus there will be a report after this, a summary available for everybody, and many activities will, let's say, will start from this Proud to Share. So it's not gonna, we are not gonna leave it there. It's a start. I want to invite the participants that are interested to stay with us as well tomorrow, the day after, and Thursday as well. Tomorrow there will be same time a webinar dedicated to accessibility and inclusivity for everybody. And then on Wednesday, there will be a webinar dedicated to outdoor disciplines and the concept of discovering material and non-material, tangible and intangible culture in the territory. And again, on Thursday, we will close with a webinar dedicated to the capacity, the tourist capacity. And I'm really proud here because we have one of the speakers with us, Dr. Bell, Director Bell from the North Devon Biosphere Reserve. So we invite you as well to connect. If you cannot, don't worry. All the webinars will be available. So thank you very much. A big applause to our speakers for their invaluable, very valuable, full of information presentations. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.